Also known as the Lord of the Nazgûl, the Witch-King of Angmar was one of the deadliest villains in the Lord of the Rings franchise. He dedicated himself as one of Sauron's most dangerous servants during the Second and Third Ages of Middle-earth, and he was even more of a threat due to his mysterious identity. Well, it was deduced that he could be one of the three noble lords of Numenor who had been corrupted by the Nine Rings of Power. The Witch-King of Angmar remains an evasive, esoteric character. Today, we'll be exploring his true nature and origins and tell you all about this entity who is infamously known as the true villain behind the Lord of the Rings. Before we get too deep into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who was the Witch-King of Angmar? What was his origin? After the Rings of Power were forged, Sauron created and wore the One Ring in SA 1600, a few years before the War of the Elves and Sauron. In the aftermath, the Dark Lord gathered the 9 rings and handed them out to powerful lords and rulers, including the Witch-King of Angmar. While we don't know much about his origins, he is assumed to be a powerful sorcerer of Numenorian heritage, and the ring's evil influence eventually led him to fall into the Shadow World. At this point, he became one of the Nazgûl, or ring wraiths, who had completely surrendered to Sauron's will, and he was first spotted in Middle-earth in SA 2251. Over the course of the next 1200 years, the Witch-King of Angmar served as one of the commanders in Sauron's armies and even fought in the war against the last alliance of elves and men. After Sauron was defeated in this fight, his ring was taken away from him, and the 9 Nazgûl also disappeared from Middle-earth after struggling to retain their physical presence. How did the Witch-King found and rule Angmar? About 1,000 years into the Third Age, Sauron had reappeared in the physical world and established the fortress of Dol Guldur in Mirkwood in TA 1050. Soon enough, the 9 also made their way back into the physical realms, and the Witch-King of Angmar was determined to exact vengeance upon the realms in exile in Dunedain. To make things easier, the northern Dunedain realm, known as Arnor, had been divided into 3 warring states called Rhudaur, Cardolan, and Arthedain. The Witch-King began his warfare to bring the entire North Kingdom down as a part of Sauron's grand plan. He also established the Dark Kingdom of Angmar adjacent to the North Kingdom's territories and unleashed an open war against the Dunedain of Arnor. He resided in Angmar's capital city, Carndum, and his return to the world of evil soon landed him a new title as the Witch-King, Lord of Angmar. What was the Witch-King's role in the Fall of Arnor? In TA 1356, the Witch-King allied with the Hillmen King of Rhudaur to lead the assault against the northerly Dunedain. They targeted King Argeleb I of Arthedain and even killed him on the battleground before proceeding to burn down the Tower of Amon-Sul. After killing King Arveleg I of Arthedain, the Witch-King targeted the Kingdom of Cardolan and annexed Rhudaur, finally killing the last of the Dunedain and expelling the rest. Finally, he targeted the Kingdom of Arthedain and almost captured it when King Arafor allied with the Elves of Lindon and Rivendell to defend their capital of Fornost Irain and emerge victorious. While they took a sigh of relief, the Witch-King's threat continued to linger for hundreds of years until the last surviving Dunedain of Carladan took his last breath in TA 1636. After this, the Witch-King sent his wights to the Barrow Downs to ensure that the kingdom remained destroyed, finally established himself as the new ruler of the North Kingdom after his forces took control over Fornost Rain in TA 1974. During this confrontation, Arvedwi Last King tried to escape, but he was drowned in the ice bay of Forochel, while the Witch-King got ready to assume a new position of power in Fornost. Over the next year, an army from Gondor arrived at the Grey Havens with their crown prince, Eärnur, and decided that they must ally with the Elves of Lindon and surviving Dunedain to overthrow the Witch-King. This soon gave way to the Battle of Fornost, where the Witch-King's forces were cornered on the Great Plains near Lake Evendil. After ambushing Angmar's forces, Gondor's forces gained a decisive advantage, and the Witch-King decided that his only option would be to flee towards the east. However, an elven army led by Glorfindel emerged from the south and cornered the last surviving members of his army when the Witch-King decided that he must face Eärnur on his own. As these two forces fought each other, Glorfindel challenged the Witch-King and even advised Eärnur against fighting him on his own. While the Witch-King was defeated, he did manage to destroy several kingdoms of Arnor before running away from the North Kingdom, while the lands of Angmar were abandoned without their leader. How did the Witch-King take Minas Ithil and become Lord of Morgle? Soon enough, the Witch King made his way to Mordor and entered the Black Lands in TA 1980, even though Sauron was still maintaining a low profile in Dol Guldur. He worked alongside the other ring wraiths to restore Sauron's power by gathering orc hordes and eventually attacking Gondor. In this mission, they laid siege to the city of Minas Ithil for 2 years before finally taking control of it and rebranding it as Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery. While Irnir inherited the throne of Gondor in TA 2043, the Lord of the Nazgûl took this opportunity to challenge him to combat. Given their history, Irnir initially declined this offer before finally accepting it in TA 2050 and riding to Minas Morgul to fight him. Unfortunately, he was never seen again, and Gondor was now ruled by the Stewards, while the Nazgûl kept a low profile at Minas Morgul for about 400 years. In the meantime, Sauron ran away to evade Gandalf and eventually returned to Dol Guldur in TA 2460 with enhanced strength, while the Lord of the Nazgûl worked on his plans to seize Gondor's former capital, Osgiliath. While he conquered the capital's eastern half, the great stone bridge that connected the east and west banks of the river Anduin were left in ruin. Meanwhile, Gandalf convinced the White Council to expel the Dark Lord from Dol Guldur in TA 2941, but Sauron refused to budge and openly settled down in Mordor. He also tried to find his One Ring and learned that it was with Baggins in the Shire in TA 3018, while the Witch King worked with the 6 ring wraiths to attack Osgiliath. They soon traveled to the Vales of Anduin to locate the Hobbit, and the Witch King led their search for the land of the Halflings. They approached Sauron, who refused to give any information, and the Witch King finally intimidated Grima Wormtongue and Rohan to give up the Shire's location. What did the Witch King do during the War of the Ring? While the ring wraiths traveled to Eriador to look for Baggins, the Witch King coordinated the search from his base in Andrath and even stirred up the Barrow-wights. He then traveled to Weathertop with 4 allies and finally stumbled upon Frodo, Aragorn, and a few other hobbits. A fight soon broke out, and the Witch King even stabbed Frodo with a Morgle knife and left him in a vulnerable position where he would have been at risk of turning into a wraith. However, Glorfindel soon rushed to Frodo's rescue and even managed to lure the ring wraiths into the river Bruinen, while Elrond patiently waited to release a flood and trap them. The Witch King and the other ring wraiths all fell victim to this plan, and their physical forms were soon destroyed, while their shapeless forms returned to Sauron in Mordor. Sauron then restored them and decided to bestow them with winged creatures to be used as mounts before sending the Witch King to Minas Morgul to command over his armed forces. In no time, the Witch King led the campaign against Gondor and briefly sensed the ring's presence while traveling on the bridge over Morgul Duin. How did the Witch King die at the Battle of Pelennor Fields? After serving Sauron for eternity, the Witch King finally found himself in a fatal position during the Battle of Pelennor Fields. He had gathered his armies to fight against the cavalry charge of the Rohirrim and even saw this opportunity to defeat King Theoden while his troops were lost about their role in the battle. He flew on the back of his winged steed and cornered Theoden before targeting his horse with a black dart and causing him to fall to the ground. While Theoden King was crushed under the weight of his horse, the dying king's niece, Éowyn, and the hobbit, Meriadoc Brandybuck, ordered him to leave him alone in his dying moments. However, the Witch King declared that they must not interfere with his prey, while Éowyn threatened to smite him if he dared to get any closer to the dying man. Éowyn then killed the Witch King's steed with a single slash of her sword, while he screeched out loud and even shattered her shield in retaliation. The Witch King then proceeded to attack her with his mace, but Merry caught him off guard and stabbed him in the back with an enhanced barrow blade at the same time. This blade was laced with magical properties that broke the spell that bound his undead flesh into place, and Éowyn then delivered the final blow by beheading him on the battlefield. What was the aftermath of the Witch King's defeat? The Witch King's death came as a huge blow to Sauron's forces, and Gandalf even predicted that this incident would weaken Sauron's confidence in his forces. He further hoped that the Dark Lord would be weak enough for Frodo and Sam to be able to pass through Mordor, convey the One Ring to Mount Doom, and just as he predicted, the Witch King's death did trigger a domino effect that would soon lead to Sauron's downfall. What powers did the Witch King possess? To begin with, the Witch King had an aura of fear that terrorized anyone and everyone in his path, and even trained soldiers and horses would make a run for their lives when they crossed paths with him. While his strength fluctuated with time and he was largely dependent on Sauron to be able to reach peak strength, he was still strong enough to be able to survive a battle with Gandalf the Grey. Even though his strength depended on the Dark Lord, the Witch King's physiology was invulnerable, and any weapon that tried to attack him would be destroyed. He could also survive in daylight and cross water bodies, even though this was a major weakness for the other Nazgûl. Finally, the Witch King had sharp senses. He could sense the presence of the One Ring when it was in close vicinity. Even though he had a wide range of powers, the Witch King's biggest strength lay in his ability to spread fear and dread, and he was capable of stirring insanity among his soldiers while also causing his enemies to shake in terror. What is known about the Witch King's true identity? While the Witch King's identity remains a mystery, he was also referred to as the Lord of the Nazgûl, or the Witch-King of Angmar for the most part. Eventually, he gained new titles such as the Wraith King, the High Nazgûl, or the Lord of Morgle, but these titles varied depending on his recent victories across the Lord of the Rings franchise. His true name was never revealed, and most merchandise and promotional material refers to him simply as the Witch King. In his final confrontation with Éowyn, she refers to him as a foul Dwimmerlake, which roughly translates to a work of necromancy in Rohanese. Some fans also refer to him as Angmar, the realm that he founded and ruled in one of his most prominent story arcs. In a particular Middle-earth role-playing game, the Witch King was referred to as Morazor, a Numenorian prince whose identity remains non-canonical. The Angband computer game has labeled him as Morazor, the Witch King of Angmar, while some fans have theorized that he was one of the 3 black Numenorians who transformed into the Nazgûl. Based on calculated deductions, theorists have suggested that the Witch King's true identity was Isilmo, a Numenorian prince and Tar Minastir's father. These theories were further fueled when the Witch King's appearance included a description of a kingly crown in the novels, which hinted at Isilmo's claim to the title, the King of Angmar. What are the mythological inspirations behind the Witch King? Tolkien also sought inspiration from mythologies and took a keen interest in studying them in great detail, especially northern mythologies. Upon taking a closer look, the Witch King's character could be inspired by an undead Witch King in the Hromundar saga Gripsonar in Norse mythology, or the Edis of Kolchis from Greek mythology. What is the power of the Witch King's sword? The Witch King's fiery broadsword has made an appearance in several films and game adaptations, including The Lord of the Rings: The Third Age. Here, he uses this sword to attack Éowyn and Barethor's party, and it seems to be his weapon of choice in almost all his appearances. Fans who pre-ordered The Lord of the Rings Conquest also gained a replica of the sword, which was also titled the Sword of Terror. How deadly is the Witch King's mace or flail? Sometimes, the Witch King also uses a deadly mace that's capable of shattering his opponent's shields or even killing them in a single swing. He would often pair the broadsword with his mace for maximum impact, but in some appearances, he would switch things up and replace the mace with a flail. In Lord of the Rings: The Battle for Middle-earth 2, the Witch King is spotted with a sword and a flail, whereas the expansion pack, The Rise of the Witch King, swaps out the flail for a steel scepter. What does the Morgle blade do to its victims? Finally, the Witch King also possessed a small Morgle blade, a potent and deadly weapon that could transform his victims into wraith slaves. He once used the Morgle blade on Frodo and put him into a state worse than death, where he would slowly suffer and transform into a wraith. While Frodo was soon rushed to Rivendell and administered a cure, other victims weren't so lucky in the Witch King's attempts to raise an army of wraith slaves. What is the Witch King's winged steed? Besides having a plethora of deadly weapons, the Witch King often used his winged steed, or Nazgûl bird, to unleash terror upon his victims. These monstrous creatures were capable of destroying structures and catapults, could even kill hundreds of enemies at once. Often, the Witch King's opponents would flee in terror as soon as they spotted his winged steed, until Éowyn finally killed this beast with her sword. How is the Witch King portrayed in films and games? For starters, the Witch King was portrayed by Brent McIntyre in his Wraith form in Peter Jackson's Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers. Later, Lawrence McAware portrayed him in Return of the King, while Ben Price played him in his human form. Andy Serkis has also voiced this character, and his story arc in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy follows his journey as one of the 9 Nazgûl on a mission to track Frodo and secure the One Ring. While he was introduced as a generic character, Return of the King established him as a deadly antagonist who was much more than just a Nazgûl, and he also had distinctive armor, a helmet, and signature weapons like his flail and flaming sword. The Witch King also made a brief appearance in a fight against Radagast in The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, as well as in The Hobbit: The Battle of the Five Armies. Some of these appearances differed from the source material by Tolkien. For instance, He was killed after the Fall of Angmar in the film, while he traveled to Mordor in the aftermath of this fight in the books. The Witch-King was also a part of Ralph Bakshi's 1978 animated version of Lord of the Rings, as well as the animated 1980 Rankin/Bass film adaptation of Return of the King. While this was all about the movies, the Witch-King has been a part of all of the Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King video games, where he appears as a boss. Typically, the player needs to shoot his Nazgûl bird until it crashes on the battlefield, after which he's killed off by Éowyn as well. The Third Age PlayStation 2 game featured him as a Pelennor Field's boss. He played a bigger role in The Lord of the Rings: The Battle for Middle-earth 2, The Rise of the Witch-King. This game featured his eventual rise to power and feat, and introduced heroes such as Morgle, while also giving us some context regarding the Witch-King's sorcery powers. He was introduced as a deadly creature who relied on elemental forces such as ice and cold to perform sorcery, and he was one of the cruelest characters in the entire game. He didn't hesitate to attack friends as well as enemies, and he also had a large health pool of about 8,000 hit points and barely any armor. Among other appearances, the Witch-King also appeared in a face-off with Aragorn in the Wii and PS3 variants of The Lord of the Rings: Aragorn's Quest. Finally, he was introduced as one of Ranger Talion's enemies in Middle-earth: Shadow of War, where he was determined to corrupt the fallen ranger to transform into a ring-wraith while also laying siege to Minas Ithil. Marvelous verdict! And with that, we've explored the Witch-King of Angmar's entire story arc, right from his mysterious origin and Nazgûl status to his untimely death. While he lived and died on the battlefield and dedicated his life to the Dark Lord Sauron, the Witch-King also left behind quite a legacy for himself. Many of the Dark Lord's plans would have never materialized without him, and in some ways, he is the true villain in the Lord of the Rings franchise. I mean, come on, Sauron's not exactly a hands-on kind of boss. He needs the Witch-King to do his dirty work for him. By spreading Sauron's reign of power and capturing strategic cities, the Witch-King has most certainly immortalized himself as one of the most ambitious villains of all time. We hope you enjoyed exploring his journey with us, and we hope you share your thoughts in the comments section down below. As always, consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the content, but until next time, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.